Michael, thanks for taking the time, man.
It's a pleasure, brother.
You've been in the circles of people I really admire, and I've seen you as a guest. And I was like, every time you spoke, you rang something in me on a physical level. And when that happens, I listen to it, and I'm like, this is someone I would love to learn from.
Yeah, thank you.
You struck a chord with me on a deep level, so I appreciate you for being who you are, man.
I appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah, man. It's an honor to sit with you, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
David opened with this line that I like, is that it's hard to put you in a box, which I totally resonate with.
Yeah.
But you put yourself as a student of life.
Yes.
And that's something in a time where, seemingly, especially in LA where we are right now, everybody has their thing. Like this is the thing I do.
Yeah.
I'm an expert in nutrition or movement or whatever. And to hear you with such a presence about you, to say I'm a student of life.
Yeah.
And to see what you've done has been super inspiring for me as someone who's kind of feeling like he's on this curvy path.
Yeah, man. Well, I think most people are, right? I mean, I think that's what's interesting is I feel like society conditions us to be like you have to be an expert, plant your flag, right? And I think there is unequivocally advantages to that, right? Like people see you in a certain light, and I think especially as you look to grow, there are advantages to be seen as an expert in certain areas. But I think for most people, like, we live in the 21st century, and we're so besieged by challenges that have been unbeknownst to other generations. So I think to be what I would call in the listening around what's true for you, and know that we are also evolving beings, and that what may be true for you 2 years ago might not be true for you now. I like to have a little bit more of a fluid notion of following kind of what's charming for me, and of course being, strategic around what could be of value to others, because I think that's where you're gonna have your greatest growth, no matter what. If you're in business, how can I be of greatest service? But I think sometimes being of greatest service is there's multiple layers, to who you are. And those layers may speak to different audiences and have different resonance. So for me, it's like the people I often respect the most are, we were talking briefly before we started filming about, elders, and I have a profound reverence for indigenous communities. And I've been honored to sit in certain circles that are oftentimes kind of closed circles. And I've noticed that the teachers I respect the most are oftentimes these elders that wouldn't brand themselves as anything. They don't purport to be an expert in anything, but they hold such profound wisdom, and they impart that wisdom through story. And that story isn't a dictate. It's not like, you need to do this, right? Which I think so many Western experts, do. It's like, I have the key that you need to unlock your potential, right? Where it's like, no, you have the key, right? And I think that's the thing. It's like, how do people realize that they're their own healers? They're their own keys. And it's more like, how do we share anecdotes and be catalysts for other people finding their own medicine? That to me is what's intriguing.
It's been an interesting journey for me. When I first started really diving deep into personal development, it was very easy for me to turn to people I loved, like family members, and be like, you gotta do this, you gotta do this. And I'm learning slowly but surely just to try to embody more than ever.
Yeah.
Which is a funny little challenge. But you're someone who has been around people of incredible feats, and you've compiled all this wisdom, and you're an alchemizer of wisdom, and you're a great storyteller yourself. So I wonder if we could go back before we get into that.
Sure.
Kind of how that started. How did you begin sitting down with people like the Dali Lama, like a former president, like Deepak Chopra, like how that is alone is a lifelong accomplishment, I would say. So how did that even come to be?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because it's the question I oftentimes get asked about the most, and it's not the thing that, we're in our own sort of, I don't think about it. Yeah. But so it's forced me to think about it, which is interesting, right? Because obviously in speaking with you, I want to be of greatest value to whoever's listening.
Which you do a great job of.
Thank you, yeah. And it's like, okay, well, there's a couple different ways to answer that question. One is the point that you just made yourself, right? Which is many of us go about paths trying to be imparters of wisdom, right? Like you said, my family, for example. When my father unfortunately was diagnosed with dementia, I did all the things to try to fix that problem. And then I realized, it's very hard to change other people, but the impetus is really on us to change ourselves first, right? So there's this, somewhat famous story about Gandhi, where a mother had come to him and she was like, I want you to tell my son to stop eating sugar. And he was like, come back in 2 weeks. And she's like, comes back in 2 weeks, and he's like, tells the son to stop eating sugar. She's like, why didn't you just say that 2 weeks ago? And he was like, because I need to stop eating sugar, right? I can't preach on something I'm not practicing. And so one of the things I realized is, we have this kind of fallacy, I think, in Western culture, which is, if only I have something, then I'll be able to do something, and then I'll be successful, right? If I have the perfect girlfriend or the perfect boyfriend, if I have the car, if I have the house, then I'll be happy, right? Like, and I'll be able to do all these things. I think the truth of the matter is, it's actually totally backwards. It's who we're being that attracts all the things we see in our lives, right? It attracts the caliber of people that come to us. It attracts those partnerships, right? There's a fallacy, I think, in relationships that two halves complete each other. It's like, no, I think an authentic, not codependent, but actually interdependent relationship is two whole and complete individuals that come together and maintain their independence, but also create an interdependence where 1 + 1 is 3, right? It's like something exponential. And so, to me, the context of my great work, I feel like, is working to be the best version of myself. And in doing so, what I've done is simply try to find ways to surround myself with those individuals I find most inspiring. And the way that I go about that, actually, tangibly or tactically, which is what I think most people are interested in, is generally speaking about leading with giving and finding something that's way bigger than me, that's beyond my self-interest, but may align with my self-interest, that's of service to that person, right? So it's like, Global Citizen, we were building a movement around ending extreme poverty, which affected 1.3 billion people around the planet. That was way bigger than me, way bigger than the team. That was a vision which other people could align with because they cared about it, and it was in their altruistic best interest.
And real fast, what was Global Citizen for the people that aren't?
So Global Citizen, for those who don't know, is a movement which I had the good fortune of being at I was the catalyst and one of the sort of creators, founders, whatever you want to call it, that launched this movement. And it was a movement where we decided to we didn't want to create a movement based in guilt and shame, which was the prevailing conversation, but more in hope and inspiration. So we held a music festival, very short form. It's on the Great Lawn in Central Park. It's about 70,000 people every year, and they don't get tickets based on buying their tickets. They get tickets based on their social action, and those actions are rewarded. So we sort of gamified social impact. Those actions are then leveraged to get multi-million-dollar, which have now exceeded billions of dollars, in commitments for programs serving the world's poor by hosting folks like the Jay-Z, Beyonce, Pearl Jam, Coldplays. And it's a free concert, so people don't have to give their money, but they have to give their heart and soul, so to speak, in the form of actions that they can take around our shared humanity. And so that was a huge catalyst for my own learning, in that I realized if you can align altruistic interests with the interest of those, so I'll give a very technical example, right? If you're going after an artist of, an A-list artist, for lack of a better term, and you're going after like a Jay-Z or Beyonce, you want to find a cause that's aligned to their personal interest, right? Alicia Keys also, she has her own charity. So you find a way in which you can add value to what they're up to. And then with Global Citizen, we created a stage that was both to huge value to the cause we were looking to serve, but also could speak to the self-interest of those parties, right? Because we could say, hey, want to perform on a stage in Central Park on the Great Lawn? Beatles never performed there. Rolling Stones never performed there. It's a very coveted, some would argue, one of the most sort of hallowed grounds in regards to sort of music, New York City, Central Park. I mean, so it has this sort of cachet, and then it was also like, we created one of the largest, maybe the largest syndicated broadcast of its kind, where it's like New York Times front page, Yahoo, AOL. So it was basically like we had 15 million people that tuned in. So it's like, okay, a large number of viewers, great stage, coveted ground, and by the way, all of that's for something way bigger. So to your question about gaining access or potentially doing something with some of these figures that have these huge names that are very identifiable, the key was it wasn't about me. It was about creating a context of a container that was way bigger than me, with people, and creating a small team that, for lack of a better analogy, punched way above weight to create a platform that had exponential value for many, many, many people. So it's about how do you create the win-win conversations. I think culturally we're so associated to like this win-lose paradigm, right? Like I'm gonna get over on you to win, and this sort of competition. And I think competition can be very healthy, but I think we oftentimes lose sight of the fact that we're all interdependent, and that ultimately our mutual success is going to be based on collaboration. And so I think when you actually delve into the nature that we are all interdependent, are all interrelated, then it's the context of like how do we create the context for profound collaboration aligned to a greater win bigger than the sum of the two parts, but also one that is aligned with the self-interest of those parts.
Because if we go off, I love that. Because if we go off the basis that we're all kind of connected, a win-win is like a +2. A win-lose is where no one's moving.
Yeah.
So it's like a universal. I like to believe it's almost like a universal momentum builder if you can get a win-win. That makes a lot of sense to me.
It is, and it's like you're preventing the suck, the energy suck that also comes from getting in bad relationships, right? Whether that be a business partnership or, I've learned the hard way more times than I care to recount. I've partnered with the wrong people in a win-lose paradigm, and the amount of energy that detracts from me building something that's actually truly aligned with my self-interest, best interest, altruistic interest is significant. And I think many people can relate to that, right? Where we all of us have made sort of, for lack of it, there's no wrong move, if you will, because even those erred steps can turn into compost for fertile ground.
Yeah.
However, I think, it's so powerful when you can early on listen to your gut and tune in and what I call be in the listening, because I think we're so attuned to, like, especially as entrepreneurs, like go out, make things happen, right? But it's like, I think, yes, you have to make things happen. It's not like law of attraction, sit on your couch and hope for things to happen. It requires bold action, but that action should be sourced first from a place of listening, alignment, and surrounding yourself with the right people, right? Like Harvard research has shown that the absolute greatest corollary to your long-term health and happiness is the caliber and quality of your long-term relationships. So I think the thing that's often infrequently spoken about, but is so critical, is who are the people that you're choosing to surround yourself with. So to bring it sort of along full circle, I've chosen to surround myself on a day-to-day level with people I love and respect, but also, there's also that old adage of you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So I try to strive to reach out to those people who are way smarter than me or have achieved things that I have profound respect for, and in doing so hopefully get some small downstream inspiration, and beyond inspiration, because inspiration is just a momentary thing, but actually a playbook for living in a different way, inspired by those I respect the most.
What you did with Global Citizen is to such a huge scale. So to hear you talk about the listening and kind of following that internal place is super cool. What was it that you at that time, that era, you were kind of listening to and following? Like what you started off that whole answer by saying like it starts with growing as a person. What that look? What kind of person were you growing into? Like what was that involvement like for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's looked like a variety of things. So I try to do things. I try to face. I have a practice of confronting fear. So, tangible example of that is it's my first. I've always loved travel. My parents encouraged travel and education. Those are their two of their core values.
Two of my biggest passions.
Me too.
So we have a lot to talk about.
yeah, definitely. And but what was interesting is when I was my first experience alone and abroad, I was actually jumped by a gang, and which was a very traumatic experience. So I started to associate being alone in the world with trauma, because one of my greatest traumas was being alone in the world. So what happened is I actually started to fear venturing out. And without going into great detail, I can, but I noticed that I associated leaving the nest with trauma. So what I had to do was I could either, I had two options. One, I could resign myself to the safety of my comfort zone, the nest, whatever that may be for people listening. I think everyone can relate to that. Or I can go as deep into that fear as possible and do what I call exposure therapy, which is expose myself to that which I fear such that it no longer has a hold on me. So in that context, what I did was I wound up my junior year abroad in college. I wound up going to Sri Lanka, a country I knew nothing about, on the opposite side of the world from where I grew up. So I grew up in Chicago, in the city, and Sri Lanka literally is on the longitudinal line on the opposite side of the world. And there I stood out like a sore thumb, I'm like 6'4" white guy, and I'm surrounded by people who are not 6'4" white guys. I definitely stood out anywhere I went. And for 2 years of my life, I lived like that. I lived sticking out like a sore thumb in a sea of people that had not even a shared worldview or shared experience in the context of the world I knew. And Dell actually had the good fortune of, when I graduated, got a Fulbright scholarship, so I wound up living with a traditional healer in a very rare form of Ayurveda, and I looked at basically how rituals were used to build community traditionally. So in Sri Lanka, traditionally there wasn't a word for privacy and there wasn't a word for possession. So literally, if a person fell out of balance, perhaps got besieged by their own fear, the way that they would be brought back is through this community ritual that was beautiful. And so I looked at like how music, which informed, for example, later down the track, thoughts around Global Citizen, but how music and community and all these different dynamics were used to bring a person back into feeling a part of something bigger than themselves. And I think in modern day life, that's one of the big challenges I think especially young people face, is so many people feel so deeply alone. And it's a fallacy that we're alone, but unfortunately our culture perpetuates this aloneness because whether it be through social media or consumption, we're taught that if only I have more followers or if only I have this thing, then I'll feel whole. And maybe for a moment you get the dopamine hit of like completeness, but ultimately it's a fallacy, right? None of us truly feel fulfilled or whole through consumption. It's about actually the recognition of and celebration of our interconnectedness. So again, it goes to that first principle of giving. And if you give and surround yourself with the right community and the right people, then that sense of loneliness is assuaged, right? And also that anxiety, which is what led me to Sri Lanka in the first place, is assuaged. So that led to a great passion. Then instead of associating fear with trauma and traveling with trauma, it became my great passion. And I spent, a large measure of my 20s traveling around the world, to sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, to South America, Southeast Asia, Laos, Cambodia, like just basically opening myself to this great university, which is living in the world.
Man, I love it. There's so much to unpack there. I'm just gonna pick one.
Yeah.
But travel for me changed my paradigm like more than I could ever express. I was out of college. Everybody's like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? And I was like, none of this looks appealing to me. I graduated with an economics degree. I'm like, none of this fits.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go travel. That at least sounds like a good answer, because everybody's like, oh, if you're gonna go travel, it sounds good. So it's almost an ego decision. And I go and I do a solo travel, very similar. I'm scared out of my mind, and spend almost a half a year in Europe. And when everything is different, the culture, the language, all you have is that relationship to yourself.
Yep.
And that was the first time that I developed some sort of internal knowing, internal voice. I came home with some direction, just some itch to start here. Just use that drone that you've never used and start doing videos for people.
Yeah.
And it started spiraling. So I love that you touched on that. And since travel has been a major passion, how do you feel travel can be utilized as like a personal development tool? That's a question I had. And is that, for me, I'm only 24 now, so I'm on the climb, but I also have this huge passion for travel.
Yeah.
Is it sustainable? You've spent 23 years traveling the world, as you put it in your podcast bio. That's basically how old I am. So I just admire that so much. How does one, build such an amazing career and such an amazing community while also, utilizing this amazingly powerful tool of travel as a personal development tool? Is that possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it is in many ways more possible than ever, right? Because of, I mean, I sort of approach technology in large measure as agnostic, right? It can be used for good or it can be used for negative consequences. But because of where we are technologically, it's easier than ever to travel, right? Like, I have friends who have sort of hacked, and I won't go into great detail, but like, now are using like, I mean, when they were up and coming, like credit card points and like, like variety, on Buddy Pat, like a variety of different things where people have like sort of figured out, because you can live in places, I lived in Bali for a couple months, this was 20 years ago, now it's obviously much more commonplace, Sri Lanka, places like this, I mean, literally, I lived for under $20 a day, so it's like, I mean, my first, like when I was, late teens, I just wait tables, which I think everyone should do, because I think everyone should be, I actually love, one of the things I loved about traveling was like I would meet people who actually had, from countries in Europe where they had mandatory service, like a compulsory service, and Peace Corps and AmeriCorps and folks like that, and it's like, I think, long story short, I think having worked in the service industry and then having done sort of philanthropic work, it was such an impetus for my own growth. But I think for those listening, there's so many ways to travel where you can volunteer in exchange. A lot of people do woofing, like go on organic farms in like New Zealand, etc. Yeah. So there's so many ways to travel now inexpensively. And there's, now van life is becoming huge. I actually just bought my first camper van. So it's like, okay.
I spent last year 6 months in a van.
Yeah, totally.
Before I came to LA.
Yeah, it's
couldn't
wild.
afford rent, so I had a van.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing, man. It's like that's wild, right? It's like, so, my intention at the moment isn't to live in it, but I'm like, okay, I want to use it now because we live in this incredible place called California. It's like Big Sur, Joshua Tree, Yosemite, and for me, nature's like, it's like church for me. So I'm like, okay, I want to find ways to go like live in those places and find ways, because for me that's my place for center and finding my resonance and being in the listening for myself. So, but international travel is still a huge part of my education, and I think there's always ways when there's a passion, it's like, and you commit. Once you commit to something, I find like the way your brain just sort of reorients itself with this sort of the universe, for lack of a better term, like opportunities start to present themselves. And I feel like once you're committed and you declare like, this is what I'm doing, and you get out of, that arbitration, that sort of deliberation that we all of us go through when making a decision, you're like, all right, I'm going to do this, even if it's like 6 months from now, I'm going to take 3 weeks, or I'm going to take a month, and I'm going to travel. And, even if you only had, several $100s or like $1,000, like you can still have an epic experience.
And I think the beautiful part is that you're reminding me, because you said it perfectly, like people, myself included, it's so easy to be, I will do this when.
Yes.
And travel comes right in there. So many people, I will travel, I just need to get my things together first, I just need to be a successful person first. And for me, I did it the opposite way. And I don't think I would have been on this path that I feel so humbled to be on had I not traveled. So it's almost not viewing them as separate things, it's viewing it as the same path.
Totally. I 100% agree. Yeah, it's seeing, I mean, look, as far as we know, we only get one shot at this dance, and it's like, all right, well, how are we going to approach it? And so for me, it's like, when I think about traveling, it's like, all right, well, I want to see as much of this world as possible and be a global citizen, and to me that comes down to like, all right, well, I think there's also an important thing, distinction to mention, which is like, I don't think you want to necessarily, I find it not as satisfying to travel for travel's sake, right? Like, there have been moments where like I've just, I was, like I shared, I was gone for almost 2 years, and during that period, there were times in which I felt a deep service, like I would volunteer, right? So after grad school, for example, I had a great fortune of going to grad school in New York, and I studied Tamil because I speak Sinhala, which is the language in Sri Lanka, and fortunately, the government paid for my tuition. And so when I finished Columbia, I did it in the 2-year degree in 1 year. I was like, I want to use the other year to volunteer as a way of sort of paying back for that what I felt was a great service. And so I traveled around the world volunteering. So I traveled to like Kenya, and I volunteered with the Greenbelt movement, Wangari Maathai, who has since passed, but profound, first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. She actually remunerates women throughout the country for planting and protecting trees. So she like literally took this great challenge and has built this movement of millions of women planting trees. So I traveled, and like I was like you, I was doing video. I was just like humbly of service. I went to Laos and did with this organization called COPE on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was doing landmine abatement, and helped them with media. So it was like I just decided to volunteer. And what was amazing is like they were already out there doing their travel and their reporting, etc. So I just kind of hitched along and then added value, and in doing so was presented with access to these extraordinary places, like places I never would have been able to get to on my own. But it was, I chose to align with these causes that I felt interested in, came from a spirit of like, how can I give back? And then was presented with these extraordinary opportunities, which also frankly happened to be like great cost mitigators. I mean, like I didn't have a ton of money at the time. I was just like, all right, well, I was grateful for having been able to go to grad school without incurring debt. I definitely incurred debt from undergrad. But fortunately, like one of the things I've recognized, and I think is encouraged in our culture, unfortunately, is this debt, which then weighs people down from that freedom of travel. And many people listening, I'm sure, are in that place, and I've been there, and I worked my tush off to get out of debt. And I recommend that for everyone. But this was a context where I was like, okay, cool, like let me pay this back, and let me do it in a way that's low cost, because I don't want to incur more debt when I come back, because that'll inhibit my freedom. But let me do it in a way where I'm creating something that's of service, which actually brings me to an interesting story, which is, around alignment, and it goes to what you were talking about earlier. So there was a moment after I did this traveling around the world where I was probably like several of the folks listening, like in a very interesting place. I didn't have a lot of money. I had finished grad school. I was kind of like, all right, what do I do next? And I had an offer, I won't mention the company, but an offer with very significant money behind it to basically represent a company that I didn't feel totally aligned to. It was a huge opportunity. It would have been easy money. And I literally, a lot of it was just me being an ambassador and doing some photography and film work and such. And so I actually did the work, and I flew to New York, and I remember I was literally, like, I just had to hand over a card for my files, and I would have been presented with a very significant amount of money and the promise of a lot more. But it just did not feel in alignment, didn't feel like the stand I wanted to be in the world, especially after doing this travel and volunteering with all these amazing organizations. And so, even though it made no sense, I basically never handed over that card. So I basically gave up that opportunity, which felt like the money I needed, but not in alignment. And instead was like, I'm going to double down on this philanthropic work, and actually volunteered for an organization called Charity Water. And I filmed their annual gala where they build freshwater wells around the world. And at that gala was actually where I ran back into a gentleman by the name of Bobby Bailey, who had started an organization called Invisible Children. And he had just launched with a global poverty project, which wound up becoming Global Citizen, which was one of the greatest paths professionally in my life. That came from me forsaking a commercial opportunity to instead volunteer my time for a company that felt very in alignment, and led to one of the greatest professional experiences of my life. And, probably in many ways what will be, along with the whole team that has worked on it, the greatest legacies of my life in terms of impacting the world. So partly, sometimes you got to take that scary decision, that feel and trust your gut, and take the hard choice. And in doing so, it's like you're declaring, this is what I'm about, this is what I'm up to. And the people, places, opportunities that are aligned with that start to find their way to you as you're in action.
I love that you differentiated the difference between travel and like meaningful travel. First off, because that is a huge point to make, in that like travel can very much be seen as just indulging for X amount of time, and that's not what I attribute all the growth to. Definitely, my mission was like, I'm going to learn Spanish, and it was just enough of a container to give me purpose, to connect with the community, to give me that growth in a soul level. And then I love what you just said, because that's kind of super on point with where I'm at right now, is what feels good, but that can be difficult when you don't have like you similarly don't have the financial placement to be like, say no. To say no is a hard thing to do
Yeah.
in the early stages. How'd
100%.
you kind of nurture that voice you had, that courage, or was that kind of an internal battle that you had to deal with?
Oh yeah, internal battle. Like, I'm not going to say it was easy by any means.
Yeah.
All of us have that, right?
And before we had a conversation, we don't have to talk specifics, but it sounds like you are even practicing this today.
Oh, 100%. No, I am. Definitely. Like, it's like...
To say no to good for great.
You say, like, there's lots of opportunities that will come your way that are like, they feel like a yes. Intellectually, they're a yes because they pull on some kind of need, right? Like financial need, what have you. In my experience, just look, for whatever it's worth, when I pursued something solely based on my intellectual desire or, whatever, that need, and it's not aligned with my gut or my values, it's gone horribly wrong. So, like, another story is, like, 2018, I literally signed a contract that was on paper way beyond anything I'd ever, because I've always been working in pretty much nonprofits, but let's just call it a 7-figure agreement. And it wasn't not aligned, but it wasn't, like, my truest purpose. And without going into great detail, that totally folded over and led to another context where, like, literally there's another entity that that year that I signed up for after that went south that was tens of thousands of dollar agreement that they never paid me for. So it's like, when I felt that when I've been burned in very hard ways where I've gone with something that felt intellectually aligned or close, and it might even be totally aligned, like the other one was totally aligned to my values, but the people weren't right. So it's like, I feel like, one, it's around discerning which opportunities are right, and is it in alignment with your head, your heart, and your gut. Sometimes your head's like, oh wow, this is super attractive, right? Like, as was the case with that agreement, which was the 7-figure agreement. But lo and behold, because the heart and the gut were sort of bypassed by how amazing that would be, I learned a very hard way that's I've got to go in total alignment. And then I learned that lesson again in 2018 when it was like, okay, here's an entity that's actually totally aligned, but I could tell, like, I kind of, it's like when you're in a relationship and, like, you're following all the things that are charming about that person, and there's red flags, but you don't want to think about the red flags because you're blinded by all the, like, epicness. Yeah, exactly. Whatever that may be, they're super funny, they're super attractive, they're all the things, but, like, by the way, they, like, flake on the phone call, or, like, they're not down to have direct conversations, whatever it is. Like, there's, like, we know that there's certain things where it's, like, so seductive that you're like, oh yes. But if you're not in alignment on, like, the totality of it, oftentimes energetically it winds up costing way more than the benefit. So what I found in the instances, again, in the listening of, like, where I've made, for lack of a better term, I don't want to say a misstep, because any step is still furthering us in, I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't learned the hard lessons that all of us learn. And it's just a deeper reckoning on, something's got to be truly aligned, even if it feels far less lucrative, right? Like, my podcast, you have this podcast, right? Me saying, I recorded years before I launched, because I had a whole ego conversation of, like, how do you go from global citizen and, like, having Jay-Z, Beyonce on stage to, like, some dude in his living room, like we are right now, having conversations. Then I saw, which I've shared with you before, but I saw this Tom Petty concert and realized, it was Fleetwood Mac, and they did a tribute to Tom Petty. And I realized I always wanted to go see Tom Petty, and I never did, and he passed away. And I was like, wow, some opportunities pass you by if you don't seize them. And I was like, I'm going to launch the podcast. If it's to 2 people, so be it. Like, I'm not going to wait till it's like another 70,000 people audience. Like, I'm just going to go ahead and, like, launch. And the things that have unfolded, because it's totally in alignment, have been game-changing this year, right? And it's not like I'm not saying it's over, like I'm just starting, but it feels so aligned. I'm so grateful to be having this conversation with you right now in my living room. It feels like one of the most valuable things I could be doing right now. Yeah. And so getting out of the way, I think, of our ego and listening again to that, like, full-bodied alignment is so, I think, integral. And that's what I learned in that story I just shared around, Bobby and volunteering with Charity Water. It was like turning down easy money that was literally to be paid to me as soon as I just literally handed something over, and saying no, and instead going, when I didn't have any money and I was broke, I'm going to keep volunteering. Like, that was a very hard decision, but yet it led to one of the greatest paths of my life. You know, and I think, so for people listening, you know, that comes down to, I think, inner knowing. So that, I mean, that's the inner work, right? So meditate, all the different things, meditation, all the different, you know, whatever you use for getting clear on your signal in the noisy world that we live in, right? Like, what gets you? For me, it's nature. That's why I brought the camper van, or travel. Like, what are the things that bring you back to your center? And then surrounding yourself again with people who are great listening boards, because sometimes we don't know our own blind spots, you know. So, but if you have trusted advisors, even if that's one person or two people that you consider your people, the way I think about it is often like, if God forbid any of us wound up, and knock on wood that doesn't happen, in the hospital, who would be the people that actually show up? And that's a real way of reckoning on like who your true people are. Because I have tons of friends, you know, especially when I was doing the festival. September, man, everyone would reach out, like, because everyone wanted to come to the festival. You know, it's like I had lots of friends, and a lot of friends in September. But then when I got real, and I'm like, well, how many of them? And that's probably a handful of people for any of us. You know, it's like, okay, those are the people you want to double down on. And sometimes those aren't the sexiest people, right? Those aren't like the big names. Those are like the family members or the friends that are like the real juice. And unfortunately, oftentimes it's not until we're in a really challenging place or in a tough way that we know who those people are. And that happened to me recently. Like, I mean, at 2018, I went from like the 7-figure deal to like $70,000 in debt, and I was like, I had to pull myself out of it. Fortunately, I have, but it was like a humbling experience, massively humbling. And I think anyone listening can like relate to, like, you know, we're sold this fallacy that the path is like, you know, this like ladder that you just climb, and it's all you know, gold, God, and glory once you hit, if only you hit this level, right? And it's so not that. It's like for anyone, it's like a wine. It's still for me, for anyone. It's this kind of like,
I catch myself in that illusion so much.
It's a circuitous. It's like it's an interesting path, and we find ways to teach ourselves the lesson, sometimes the hard way. And until we've actually learned the lesson and applied it, it'll keep showing up in our lives. So for me, I just was like, you know what, I don't mind, you know, I didn't, gratefully, like, not even like a year later, now I'm in a place where it's like, okay, I've got myself out of that, and I'm, you know, buying a camper van, and like, but that came from me like committing to, okay, even though it doesn't intellectually maybe seem like the most lucrative option, I'm going to go with that which feels totally aligned to who I am and what I want to create. And it's led to boundless opportunities that I never would have expected, even in the context of the podcast, right? Like, we're doing this right now. I had a conversation at 9 a.m. I'm like, the last night, one of my greatest sponsors, partners, came over, and I was like, we just so vibed, and I was like, you know, I'm so grateful that I'm doing what I do. I'm passionate about sharing messages. I feel like I'm living my purpose. I'm working with brands I'm totally aligned with, that I love. I would buy their products, but they're actually believe in me and my show and the message I'm putting out in the world, so they're investing in it. And it's like, okay, this is amazing. Like, I'm doing what I love. You know, there's still lots of room to grow, but I don't on any morning wake up and be like, oh man, I'm not stoked I'm doing that, right? And it's like, that's a quest, I think, for all of us, right? Like, how do we live purposeful lives in the 21st century? And I think especially for young people, including myself, I mean, large part of my 20s were angsty. And like, by the way, that doesn't like totally go away. Like, each phase of life, I feel like, leads to different big questions, right? But, you know, I think finding those anchors and like doubling down on the anchors that feel aligned, to me, is the path in which you keep in a good way in your walk as you walk with purpose, right? And to me, that's also like the warrior's creed, which is like, it's a good day to die, and that's like the Stoic, like using death as an impetus for living, right? Like a warrior in many Native American cultures, it wasn't like the warrior in the way that we see it, like where it's like go off and like, you know, conquest. It was more like I am a stand for something bigger than myself, and I'm willing to sacrifice my life for that, you know. And I think for me, I often use that as like, if I'm walking too many days where I don't feel like it's a good day to die, or I'm not walking in a way where it's like I feel like I'm standing for something bigger than myself and also feel good about what I'm putting out in the world, then I know I'm walking in the wrong direction. So I feel like using whatever those anchors are that keep you walking in a good way, it's great to be able to come back to those.
The anchors, I love that. They're a guidepost that, like, every variable can be different. You can still be in that flowing state, like you said, but if you have those things, at least for me, podcasting is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
The fact that I'm sitting here with you, it's like, this is right. This is alignment. And then I love that you touched on finding a way to find your center daily, whether it's meditation. For me, it's nature as well oftentimes, but that for me has been a big growing experience that I'm still working on, is differentiating ego, fear. Like I could easily say, I have this podcast with Michael Trainer, I'm nervous. It's not a good fit. This doesn't feel right. He probably doesn't vibe with me, but really, no. Like the first time I was around you, the second time I was like, yes, this guy is awesome. I want to sit with him. So differentiating natural nerves that come with progression and surrounding yourself with people that bring out a different side of you, but then also that ego fear that like tries to keep you small, almost tries to keep you in your box, like stay
comfort
there.
Zone. It's
comfort
like
zone.
Stay comfortable.
And one of the first things you said was exposure therapy. Podcast is a great way to do that. I'm sure you're talking to some Dali llama, things like that.
Yeah.
What are some practices that you return to when you get faced with that?
Yeah, it's a great
fear,
question.
That comfort zone fear.
I think that it's a funny dance because it's like, and I think about it like a dance.
It is a dance.
It's a dance because it's like, so I'm also extroverted by nature, but I'm an ambivert truly. So I'm extroverted by nature. I feel like on fire when I'm on purpose in a room. Like I love that. However, I need and know about myself that I need also to go introvert. So I need to go charge in nature. I need to be by myself. I need to live by myself. I need to I live on the beach. I need to go jump in the ocean or do a sauna. I need those moments of like, but I know also that if I stay too long in an area where I'm comfortable, or if I did like Bonnie Parrott and like move to a log cabin, I probably for a period of time that'd be good for like writing a book, but it wouldn't be me living my true gift in the world because it would be too much in my comfort zone. I would probably delight in it for a period, but to me it's like, how do I keep pushing the boundaries of that comfort? So in the context like you're sharing with the podcast, it's like, who do I reach out today that scares me? Like, right? So, and that's the beauty, by the way, for those that are listening. It's like the beauty is like now, one of the things I think about is my view is like networking as we knew it is dead. And what I mean by that is like, I go to conferences and it's like if someone's looking at my name badge and trying to see what way they can extract value from me whilst looking over my shoulder to see who's more important behind me, it's like that's a dead conversation. I oftentimes don't even lead, I personally don't even lead with asking people what they do. Like I want to get to know who someone's being, and then if there's resonance, great, and if that leads to them having something that's aligned, even better. But like I think ideally you move in a way where it's like you're not trying to transact or extract value, which is how we're taught, but actually how can I be of service? How can I give, right? Yeah. When you reached out to me, and I'm a yes anyway, because I just like you, I like who you are, I like how you show up in the world. But you also were like, you led by being like, hey, let's do this, and like it was all like, how can I be of value to you? And to me, it wasn't even about the value. I wasn't like, oh, whatever. I was just like, I liked you, but also I just liked that you were like, I'm aligned to adding value to people. And that's what I try to do. I try to create platforms where it's of value to people, right? I'm working on a large-scale meditation for 2020, connecting people who meditate to planting, protecting trees in the Amazon. And that's just because I feel like kind of in some ways helpless given the world we're living in today and how much the sort of guy in mind we've fallen away from that in our interdependence and interconnection to nature. But I'm also like, you know what, trees are something, I don't care what your political orientation is, everyone can get behind like planting, protecting trees. And like I'm all into exponential technology, but as far as I can tell, a tree is one of the greatest ancient technologies around. And we all breathe. And the reason we are able to breathe is because of trees. So I was like, you know what, let me do something. I have connections to some amazing indigenous leaders in the Amazon. Let me do something like where we can do a very large scale meditation, or for each person that meditates, we plant a certain number of trees. Now in doing so, it's scary because I'm now going to go after like some very large scale I don't like the word, but let's call it influencers, celebrities, what have you, again, like I did back in the days with Global Citizen. But I'm okay with that. Why? Because I'm not asking about something that's for me. Now, there will likely be some kind of a tangible downstream benefit for me because I'm holding that container. But I'm far less fearful of stepping out of that comfort zone because it's not about me. It's about something bigger than me, right? It's like I'm going to go in a whole totally different direction. But like, again, back to that warrior's creed. If you were, God forbid, in a place of combat, it's not the only way you can stay in that place and have courage, I think, is because if you're doing it for something bigger than yourself, right? Like, my value is to be a pacifist. I believe in peace. However, if someone threatened my family, that's a different story, right? And it's like, okay, what are you willing to stand for that's so dear to you that you will step way beyond your comfort zone? Like, I've heard stories of like mothers where like, and whether this is, I haven't seen this, but someone can fact check it, but like where a mother will have superhuman strength and like can move a car to protect her child. I think, what is the context of that which you care so much about that's bigger than you? And if you're doing that, I mean, Greta's an amazing example, right? Times Person of the Year, 16-year-old, right? She now can reach out to anyone, and with the exception perhaps of the current president, they would be totally enlivened by the opportunity to connect with her. Yet, why is that? Because she evokes this possibility of someone standing for something bigger than themselves, right? And people yearn for that. They yearn to be on purpose in that way, right? Like, she's not everyone's gonna, like, instead of flying a plane, take a sailboat around the world, but everyone admires the fact that here's a 16-year-old who's literally gonna take a 3-week sailboat ride because she doesn't want to expend fossil fuels to bring about awareness. And again, it goes to that point of she's practicing what she's preaching, right? And so to me, there's that notion of like, how do you, if you align to something bigger than yourself and you're actually humbly looking to live in accordance with that truth, again, it attracts this powerful attention, and oftentimes that leads to doors that you never would have guessed you could open because of the fact that you're walking that path, and people can see you're walking that path, right? Like, some people, for example, in the context to bring it back to tangible, the podcast, I know I want to reach out to, but I'm also like, you know what? Let me continue to do the hard yards. Let me show them this is not a flash in the pan. I'm gonna wait till I have like 100 episodes in the can and like have been consistent week in, week out, and I have something that's bigger than me, where it's like, which is why I'm thinking about this, working on this meditation campaign, because it's like, all right, certain people I want to reach out to, but I don't want to just reach out to them to have them on my podcast. I want to be like, hey, you know what? I'd love to share your narrative, ideally around something that's of value to them, right? Like they're launching a book, they have a film that's coming out. And then utilize that in compound effect with all the other people that I'm then building around this broader cause to shine this macro light through bringing all these different influential parties together around something bigger than ourselves. So to me, I think about like, how do you catalyze a broader movement or momentum by bringing together people aligned again from a place of both their enlightened self-interest and an altruistic context or cause that's bigger than the sum of the parts.
And that can apply to such a small level that, like, I can feel that on a physical level. If I'm nervous, it's likely because I'm putting too much of the pressure or the outcome on how will this result for me, how I need to show up, how I need to perform. That could be for athletics, that could be for a job, that could be a podcast. But the second I kind of shift it and be like, I am celebrating Michael and I'm so happy to be giving him value in the form of video, and I know this is going to help him, and I get to do my small humble part of sharing his message, it really did relieve some weight. So the fact that you kind of touched on that was super cool.
Yeah.
I want to try to hit like 3 more questions.
Totally.
So they'll be relatively shorter. If you were to kind of prescribe someone that is kind of lost and floating through life and wants to live this intentional, purposeful life that you've done a great job of doing, build a career, one that is aligned with their values, their spirit, all that good stuff. Is there, like, it's kind of a tough thing to do, but a pillar system or some sort of prescription you would give someone to go from kind of like this messy fog to kind of like this honed in, purposeful, driven life?
Yeah, I would say to me it's about anchors and keeping it real granular. So like a lot of times people get into these altruistic like, yes, map out your 5-year plan. What I would recommend to people listening is there's an exercise. I did an episode with a gentleman on my podcast named Jarek Robbins, Tony Robbins' son. Listen to that episode if you want to do this exercise. But he has something called the ideal day exercise, where you literally map out your ideal. What do you want your ideal day to look like? Right? How do you want to wake up? What activities would you include in that day? How do you want to feel during that day? What kind of people are you surrounding yourself with that day? And what's interesting about that exercise is you get a real perspective. Some of the things, if you try to think about what's the purpose of my life, it just seems so big, right? And I think in some of the folks that I've interviewed, so much of the key to people who've achieved beyond measure successes, there's another guy I interviewed, Charlie Engle, who literally basically ran across sub-Saharan Africa. Like, he ran 2 marathons a day in the desert for like 120 days or something like that. And how he did it was he broke down each day into 2 marathons. He had to do a marathon before lunch, and then he broke down each marathon into steps, right? Well, so compounded, it led to this epic achievement. But the way he did it was he segmented and he did 1 step at a time. So I think what the ideal day exercise does is once you isolate how you want to feel and what you want to experience each day, then my biggest advice is simply to try to get 1% better each day, right? So many people are like, oh, they fall. We all fall, right? Like if they're dieting and they eat like the chocolate cake, oh, they beat themselves up, guilt, shame. Like don't get into the guilt and shame train, right? Like, acknowledge if you took a misstep. Okay, cool. Like this is what I'm going to do to commit to be 1% better tomorrow, right? And I think that idea of 1% and applying and keeping in mind what is ideal for you in a way that's very tangible and very pragmatic, and then compounding that by adding a little bit more, getting a little bit closer to that each day, you'll find over the long term, and I think we have unfortunately because of our Instagram generation, we have a lack of patience. But like I just saw on Instagram, Gary Vaynerchuk, 10 years ago, he's literally scanning wine bottles at his father's wine store, right? 10 years later, he's got tens of millions of followers across platforms, is on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. But like, how did that happen? It happened by him putting in the work every day over the course of 10 years. So I think there's a saying, we often overestimate what we can accomplish in a year and underestimate what we can accomplish in a decade. And I think thinking about that and really getting even more granular and thinking about what can I accomplish in a day, and then just focusing on being a little bit better each day, it's life-changing.
What's it mean to be a student of life? You are the true epitome of that. How would you synopsize someone who wants to alchemize wisdom, wants to be like, what is a student of life?
For me, being a student of life is being in the listening. It's about, and it's not a passive experience. It's active listening. So it's really tuning into yourself, to your vision, your values, and being in the question. I think living in the question of who am I? Who am I each day? How do I want to show up each day? Who do I want to be in this interaction on this day? And literally stacking experiences, people, your path, the way you walk in the world in a good way, based on that listening and how it feels to be in the experience of who you're interacting with or how you're showing up. To me, we've had this vision of school which is very passive and post-colonial, frankly. School was based on sort of 20th century industrial capitalism. And it's like, I am the receiver of said information. I go from first grade to second grade to third grade. I get a job for 30 years, I get a gold watch, I retire. That paradigm is broken and antiquated. It's like, how do we, as students of life, apply our own insights and the great opportunities of 21st century living in terms of our access to travel, our access to the great thinkers of our time through books and the internet and access to platforms like podcasts. How do we utilize the great opportunities to be in the listening, and then each day apply our own great vision and values to move one step closer to our goal, and continually from that place of listening reorient, am I walking in the right way, right? To me it's like there's no like right way that's like forever the right way. There's no like straight line to success. It's how do I continue to iterate on my steps each day to get 1% better, such that from a place of listening, I get closer and closer to that place of center that is my own unique truth, voice, and expression in the world.
Internalizing that for sure. One of the original things that I loved that you said, Tom Petty had passed and you realized you needed to put out your work because you didn't want to die with your song in you. And you say, sing your song, sing your music.
Yeah.
And man, I was like, yeah, like hit it on the head, on the head. So what is your song, Michael? What is the tune that you're currently playing? I would love to hear how you put it in your own words. Like how do you define what you're putting out in the world?
Yeah, I mean, my song is, it's interesting because music is my passion. Obviously, launched a music festival, listen to music all the time. Now I'm listening to a lot of what I would call medicine music, which is really about the ability that music has in the context of our own healing and the ability it has to forge community. So, for example, traditionally in like plant medicine circles, I had the great pleasure to sit with a roadman from the Native American church, and he would use the rattle. And the way that he used the rattle, I kind of describe it as, he's an amazing man, big man. You wouldn't recognize by looking at him that he's like as prolific of a musician as he is. He's this very, very large DNA man, and he's got a trucker hat on and t-shirt. And I described it as like I was sitting next to him, and it's like you could be sitting next to Aretha Franklin on a bus and have no idea who you're sitting next to, because Aretha on a bus is not singing her music. When he sang his music and he worked with that rattle, it was like this scene from A River Runs Through It at the end. I don't know if people have listened, but where basically Brad Pitt's casting, and he's put 20,000 hours in, and his casting technique is this very unique way of fly fishing. And it's beautiful. It's like orchestral. It's synchronized. And this moment with Jerry where he was working with this rattle and starts to sing. He sings with this deep timbre that was like Aretha Franklin, but what was his own music. And it was the way that he moved that rattle. It evoked within everyone listening the deep resonance within their heart, their soul of who they are. And to me, music that is amazing music, which we know, because all of us, we know that like a hit song is a hit song because it hits this resonance it evokes within all of us this shared possibility. It's also why I love festivals, because it's a modern day way in which, these beautiful songs can be brought to life in the listening of other people, making it real and dancing and singing along to that song. My hope is that humbly, in my own way, I become more and more comfortable in being in my own listening and sharing these incredible peak minds of the world in a way that creates aliveness in other people, in a way that people can find their own unique truth in the rhythm section that's laid down by the sharing of those peak minds, such that their own melody weaves into the music, like Jerry did with that beautiful rattle, where the song was one we all shared together, but laid on this very unique, resonant foundation, such that it evoked in everyone a greater possibility.
That was such a beautiful answer, and I really appreciate you just saying such a beautiful thing right there, because it gave me a really nice way to North Star articulate my vision and my purpose.
Yeah, please.
So thank you for that.
That'd be great.
No, you saying that for me, so many question marks around being a student of life and feeling like I'm trying to optimize information and grow. Like what you just said is such a way in which so many people can live.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that.
Yeah, everyone can, right? I think that's the thing we forget. We're all interdependent and we're all interconnected. And so, we get lost in this, I think, fallacious notion that someone's figured it out and like they're living it and I'm not. And the truth of the matter is, we are all inextricably linked to each other. And as it goes with the micro, so goes the macro. As it goes with the macro, so goes the micro. And so that's why I think that, to me, when we use the analogy of music and being a student of life, it's really figuring out how to weave our instrument, our unique expression, our unique voice with the rhythm section, the harmonies of those around us, such that it creates a unique and beautiful song.
One of my favorite questions to end on is, if you were to change nothing, and assuming everything happens for a reason, assuming you're exactly where you're supposed to be, and I know you believe that, what is a piece of encouragement, advice, or anything like that you would give your 24-year-old self?
I think to not worry so much about taking things so seriously, to be in joyful expression. I think oftentimes I have in the past, and I'm a joyful person at my core, at times my seriousness or my like over deliberation, overthinking, especially in my 20s, compromised my expression of joy. And I think that the thing that I would tell myself is both, it's almost seemingly paradoxical, because it's basically like you're thinking so hard into your purpose that if you actually just like took a step back, listened to the music, and danced a bit more, from that place, you'd actually be living more of your purpose from that joy. So for me, that's what I would say is be more in the listening and less in the overthinking and deliberation.
Man, you are. I feel very connected to you. So I really appreciate you. Is there anything I missed? Anything you want to close out on that you want to leave people with? If not, also include where people can find you. Peak Mind. So fun.
Yeah.
So fun to research.
No, people can. So people can find me anywhere on the interwebs. I'm at Michael Trainer on all social platforms.
Cool.
If they want, they're more than welcome to listen to Peak Mind with Michael Trainer. It's on all the platforms. And I would say the one thing is, if people are resonating with that idea of the meditation and music for the planet, hit me up at peakmind.org. I'm just Michael at peakmind.org, and they can sign up online. But in terms of like anything to leave people with, I would just say, I think we're all walking, and none of us truly have figured it out. I think, I'm always inspired. The teachers, again, to bring it sort of full circle, that I respect the most are the storytellers, and they're oftentimes the most humble, and they never tell you, this is how you have to live. If you don't do this, then this. In my experience, humble experience, they live their truth in a unique way, and they have a sort of resonance about them, right? It's like a good song. It's like you want to be closer to them. And oftentimes that's not about the words they share, but it's their way of being, the way they walk in the world. So I think, and the truth is that we are our own teachers and our own healers. And when we are in the listening within ourselves, and also surrounding ourselves with those resonant humans that just feel like they're walking in the world in a way that really speaks to us, I think the only thing I would say is hold those people close, because there's no greater value in life than our health and our time on the planet, because that's finite, but that is maximally utilized through surrounding ourselves with the most quality people. So to me, I would just say, find your people that resonate with your song and you resonate with theirs, and make beautiful music.
Thank you, Michael.
Pleasure.
My man.
Yeah.
You're a legend.
No, it's a pleasure. Yeah.